Okay, strap in, everybody, because today we are diving into some pretty intense intellectual waters.
Oh, yeah.
We're tackling Noam Chomsky's At War with Asia.
Wow.
This collection of essays from 1971
Yep.
really digs into America's role in Indochina during the Vietnam War.
Right.
You know how history often gets simplified, gets told in these kind of neat and tidy stories?
Yeah, I do.
Well, Chomsky picks those apart.
Hmm.
He really looks at what was driving U.S. actions in Southeast Asia,
Okay.
especially when it comes to the economic side of things.
Right.
So get ready for some serious aha moments because we're going to unpack all of this. And, the Vietnam War, it wasn't just some tragic mistake.
Yeah.
It was actually part of a much bigger pattern
Interesting.
that Chomsky really lays out.
So how does he do that?
Well, what's fascinating is
Yeah.
he goes beyond just, pointing fingers or blaming.
Mhm.
He really digs deep into the motivations behind American foreign policy.
Right.
And the picture he paints, it's one where economics play a starring role.
Yeah, and he uses this term economic imperialism.
Right. It sounds kind of
ominous
Well,
when you hear it.
a little bit.
Like, was the U.S. really out to, control the whole world's economy?
Well, Chomsky argues that the U.S. government
Yeah.
was very much influenced by powerful economic interests, and they were really, really concerned with staying on top
Yeah.
of that global economic ladder.
Right.
And they really didn't want anyone,
Mhm.
communist or not,
Yeah.
rocking that boat,
Yeah.
especially in a region like Southeast Asia, so rich in resources.
So are you saying it wasn't just about, fighting communism?
Right.
But making sure that nobody messed with this economic order that the U.S. had kind of set up?
That's exactly it. And to really illustrate this point,
Okay.
Chomsky, he uses the Philippines as a case study.
Okay.
He shows how the U.S. basically turned the Philippines into almost an economic satellite,
Wow.
even more tightly controlled than some U.S. states. Really?
Yeah, and this was achieved through a mix of financial incentives and military aid,
Wow.
all aimed at keeping them in line,
Okay.
particularly during the Vietnam War.
So we're talking about concrete actions here,
Yeah.
like that $40 million payment to the Philippines
Right.
for sending troops to Vietnam.
Precisely, and what's even more telling
Yeah.
is the stated purpose of this aid,
Oh, yeah.
ensuring internal security and stability.
Okay, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Let's unpack that phrase, internal security and stability.
Yeah.
Because it sounds a bit vague.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But if we connect it back to what Chomsky's arguing,
Okay.
that economic imperialism,
Yeah.
it starts to make a lot more sense.
Oh, okay.
The U.S. wasn't just worried about communism as like an ideology.
Right.
They were
Okay.
really worried about anything that disrupted
Yeah.
the flow of resources and goods that benefited them.
Okay.
They wanted to make sure Southeast Asia remained open for business.
Right?
But business on their terms, of course.
Right. So this brings us to the domino theory,
Mhm.
which was this really popular justification for the war.
Right. The idea that if one country fell to communism,
Yeah.
the whole region would follow.
Yeah.
Like a row of dominoes
Exactly.
toppling over.
But Chomsky wasn't buying it.
No, he wasn't.
He saw it as like this.
He saw the domino theory as this convenient
Yeah.
but ultimately flawed rationale.
Okay.
He argued the real domino effect
Yeah.
that the U.S. feared was
Economic dominoes.
If Southeast Asia started to slip out of their sphere of influence,
Okay.
it would really impact their allies,
Mhm.
especially Japan,
Right.
which relied heavily on those markets for its
Yeah.
own growth.
And losing Japan, a key ally in the region,
Yeah.
would have been a major blow to U.S. interests.
Absolutely. The U.S. was very carefully constructing this system
Mm-hmm.
of economic interdependence
Yeah.
with Southeast Asia as like a crucial component.
Okay.
Losing those markets
Mm-hmm.
might push Japan towards China, which the U.S. was determined to isolate.
Right. So it's like a high-stakes economic chess game.
It really is. And Chomsky, he actually cites a report
Okay.
from the Council on Foreign Relations
I heard of that.
to back this up.
Okay.
And this report really emphasized the need for Japan to have access to Southeast Asian markets
Mm-hmm.
for its own economic growth,
Okay.
which the U.S. saw as vital
Yeah.
for containing communism.
It's fascinating how much these
Yeah.
economic interests are intertwined with these political strategies.
It really is.
It's almost like the U.S. was saying, we need to keep these countries free
Mhm.
so they can participate in our economic system.
Right?
But wasn't that system often at odds
It was.
with the interests of developing nations?
That's a key point that Chomsky highlights.
Yeah.
there's this inherent power imbalance in these relationships.
Yeah.
The U.S. was prioritizing material progress and free markets, often at the expense of the needs and desires of the people in these developing countries.
Okay, so we've talked about the economic motivations, but what about the human cost of the war?
Right.
Chomsky doesn't shy away
He does not.
from those brutal realities on the ground?
No. He describes a deliberate U.S. military strategy that they called urbanization or modernization. And it really involved disrupting rural society in South Vietnam, forcing peasants into cities and refugee camps to weaken the Viet Cong's support.
So basically
Uprooting people, their entire way of life.
It sounds incredibly disruptive.
It was.
They're brutal.
Chomsky actually quotes Daniel Ellsberg, who worked for the Department of Defense, as saying, "We have, of course, demolished the society of Vietnam."
Wow, demolished that.
Think about that word.
Yeah, that sounds
That's collateral damage.
That's a deliberate strategy.
Yeah, that quote is chilling.
It is.
And it wasn't just South Vietnam that suffered, was it? No, Chomsky talks about the massive bombing campaigns in Laos.
Right.
And those campaigns resulted in the displacement of millions of people. Millions. Imagine being forced from your home, your land, your way of life.
It's your whole world.
All because of a conflict you didn't start.
Yeah.
And these people, they ended up in overcrowded cities, facing poverty and hardship directly caused by the war.
So the war created a refugee crisis.
It did a massive
On a massive scale.
And it's important to remember, these aren't just numbers on a report.
Right.
These were real people whose lives were shattered by this conflict.
Chomsky really forces us to confront that human cost.
He don't.
To see beyond just the political maneuvering and really acknowledge the suffering that was inflicted.
And it wasn't just physical destruction either.
No.
Chomsky also points to the strong anti-war sentiment within Vietnam itself.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
He highlights the resentment that many Vietnamese felt towards foreign intervention.
Yeah.
There's this incredibly poignant quote from a Vietnamese citizen who says, "I have no longer put up with the sight of foreigners who presume to have the right to destroy my country in the name of protecting the freedom of the people."
Wow. That quote is powerful.
It is.
It really highlights the disconnect between what the U.S. claimed it was doing.
Yeah, the stated goals.
And the actual experience.
Right, the lived experience.
Of the Vietnamese people.
Exactly. And it raises questions about the information that was being shared, both within Vietnam and back in the U.S.
Okay.
Chomsky suggests that American citizens were often shielded
from the truth.
From the true realities of this conflict.
So it's not just about like the physical battles, but also about the battle for information.
It is a battle for information.
For controlling the narrative.
Precisely. Chomsky talks about the suppression of dissent within South Vietnam.
Yeah.
The lack of genuine democratic institutions. And he connects this back to the U.S. fear of truly free elections in a country where anti-war sentiment was so strong.
So this fear of free elections, suppression of dissent, it all goes back to that overarching fear of losing control.
It does.
Losing that economic and political influence in the region.
Exactly. And to further illustrate this point, Chomsky really dives deep into Laos as a case study.
Why Laos specifically?
Because it perfectly exemplifies the devastating impact of this war on a largely rural, impoverished country.
Right.
Laos became heavily dependent on U.S. aid. Which, ironically, fueled corruption within the Laotian elite.
Wow. So the aid intended to help actually made things worse.
It's a tragic case of how aid, often intended to help, can actually exacerbate existing problems.
It's like the law of unintended consequences.
It really is. But Chomsky, he also found some positive developments in Laos.
Oh, really?
Specifically in areas controlled by the Pathet Lao.
Okay.
He draws this sharp contrast between those government-controlled areas riddled with corruption and the areas under Pathet Lao administration. Despite being constantly under threat from American bombing, the Pathet Lao prioritized social development, education, and healthcare.
Wow. It's remarkable that they were able to achieve so much under such difficult circumstances.
It speaks to their resilience and their determination to build a better future for themselves, even amidst a war.
And Chomsky actually shares details.
He does.
From interviews with refugees and defectors that really bring this contrast to life.
He paints this picture of life in the Pathet Lao areas.
Yeah.
Compared to urban centers like Vientiane, which was heavily influenced by Western culture and, you know, really plagued by corruption.
So a very different experience.
And he even describes the widespread destruction caused by the American bombing campaigns. Emphasizing how they targeted civilian infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
Forcing people into hiding. Disrupting their lives.
It's awful.
It's a recurring theme in Chomsky's analysis. These bombing campaigns weren't just about military targets. They were about disrupting society. Breaking the will of the people.
Breaking their spirit.
He even mentions this chilling testimony from a Laotian bomber pilot.
A Laotian?
Who admitted that vast areas were designated as free strike zones.
Free strike zone.
Where any target, civilian or not, could be attacked.
It's hard to even comprehend that.
It is.
That level of indiscriminate violence.
And it really underscores that human cost of the war. A cost that Chomsky just refuses to let us forget.
And we should.
You know, it's interesting. Chomsky doesn't just, you know, limit his critique to Vietnam. He uses the Vietnam War as like a lens to examine this much broader pattern in U.S. foreign policy, this idea of American imperialism, but with a real focus on economics.
So we're kind of zooming out now.
We are.
Looking at the bigger picture.
Chomsky argues that this drive for economic dominance, it wasn't just a Cold War thing. He looks back at historical examples, like the Spanish-American War and what happened in the Philippines afterward. And he finds these striking parallels between the justifications used then and those used during the Vietnam War.
Give me an example. What kind of parallels are we talking about?
Well, think about how the U.S. framed its intervention in Cuba and the Philippines in the late 1800s. It was all about liberating oppressed people from Spanish tyranny.
The U.S. is the hero.
Exactly. A benevolent savior narrative.
Coming to the rescue.
But, Chomsky argues, that this rhetoric often masked the true motivations,
which were
securing access to resources and markets in those regions.
Sounds familiar.
It's the same playbook they used in Southeast Asia decades later.
So it's this consistent pattern of, you know, economic self-interest
driving military intervention, dressed up in humanitarian language. And it goes beyond just direct military action. Chomsky also points to the use of economic aid as a tool to influence the policies of developing nations. Often this meant pushing them towards economic models that primarily benefited the U.S.
So it's not just boots on the ground, but also using that financial leverage.
It is a form of leverage.
To kind of get what they want.
And sometimes it meant supporting authoritarian regimes. As long as they were willing to play ball economically. It gets really complex and often unsettling when you start peeling back the layers of these interventions.
It makes you question the whole notion of helping other countries.
It does, and this brings us to another crucial element of Chomsky's analysis. The role of propaganda in information control.
We talked about that a little bit.
We touched on it.
With the suppression of dissent in South Vietnam.
But Chomsky's saying it's much bigger than that.
Bigger. How?
He argues that controlling information and shaping public perception are key to maintaining this system of economic dominance.
So control the information, control the people.
Think of it this way. If people really knew what was happening, if they understood the true motivations and costs of these interventions, they might not be so supportive.
That's a good point.
So it's not just about hiding information. It's about actively shaping the narrative to serve specific agendas.
So how does this relate specifically to the Vietnam War?
Well, Chomsky argues that the U.S. government and media, they downplayed the brutality of the war. They portrayed it as this fight against communism while ignoring that human cost. And this allowed the war to drag on for years. Despite growing public opposition. It's a chilling thought.
It is.
That the truth can be so easily manipulated.
It really is. And it's a reminder that we need to be critical consumers of information.
Absolutely.
Don't just accept what you're told.
Dig
deeper.
Seek out different perspectives. Form your own informed opinions.
Be an active participant.
Exactly.
Not just a passive consumer.
You know, another fascinating thread in Chomsky's analysis,
Yeah.
is the impact of the war not just on Southeast Asia,
Right.
but on American society itself.
This is an angle we haven't really explored yet.
How does he connect the war in Vietnam to domestic issues within the U.S.?
Okay.
Well, he argues that the war
Yeah.
had a profound impact on American politics and society.
Okay.
For one thing, the escalating military spending diverted resources from social programs.
Okay, so basically robbing Peter to pay Paul.
And that really exacerbated economic inequality within the U.S.
So the war wasn't just a foreign policy issue.
Yeah.
It had tangible consequences for Americans at home.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about money.
Okay.
Chomsky also argues that the war contributed to this climate of fear and paranoia.
Within the U.S.?
Within the U.S.
Wow.
This fueled McCarthyism and the suppression of dissent.
Right. Anyone who questioned the war effort was labeled unpatriotic or even a communist?
So fighting communism abroad was used to justify cracking down on dissent at home.
Wow. That's
Chomsky's argument.
Chilling.
He sees a clear connection between the rhetoric of fighting for freedom overseas and silencing critical voices within the U.S.
Wow.
It's about maintaining power.
Maintaining power.
Both at home and abroad.
It's all connected.
It is.
This feels incredibly relevant today.
It does, doesn't it?
Even though we're talking about events from decades ago.
These themes of economic imperialism, information control, suppression of dissent, they're not confined to the past.
They're still playing out.
They're still very much present.
In different ways.
In our world today.
It's like Chomsky's giving us this framework for understanding how power operates.
It's a framework.
Regardless of the specific historical context.
Exactly. And that's what makes his analysis so powerful.
Yeah.
It's not just about the Vietnam War.
Right.
It's about understanding those deeper forces at play in global politics.
The forces that shape our world.
The forces that continue to shape our world today.
Now let's get a little bit more specific.
Right.
Chomsky spends a lot of time discussing the role of multinational corporations in shaping U.S. foreign policy.
And this is where his critique of economic imperialism gets really concrete.
Okay.
He argues that these corporations, with their vast wealth and global reach, they have a huge influence on government policies.
Okay.
It's almost like the U.S. government is acting on behalf of these corporations, even when it conflicts with the needs of the American people or people in other countries.
He's not talking about all corporations, though, right?
No, he focuses on specific industries.
Okay. Which ones?
He particularly highlights those heavily invested in industries like oil mining and manufacturing.
Okay.
He argues that these industries seeking access to resources and markets in Southeast Asia played a key role in pushing for U.S. intervention.
So it's not just about, these abstract economic forces.
Right.
It's about specific industries and corporations.
It is.
Profiting from war and conflict.
Exactly. And Chomsky doesn't shy away from naming names.
Oh, really?
He talks about companies like ITT, United Fruit, various oil companies.
Wow.
They were actively lobbying for policies that benefited their bottom line, even if it meant tremendous human cost for others.
It's a good reminder that war is often big business.
It is.
Even if it's dressed up in this language of national security and freedom.
Chomsky's urging us to look beyond that rhetoric and see the economic interests that are often driving these conflicts.
Follow the money.
Follow the money. On economics. He's not exactly a fan of the free market concept as it's usually presented, is he?
Not really. He's pretty critical of it, actually.
Yeah.
He argues that the idea of free markets, especially the way it's often portrayed in mainstream economic discussions, it's kind of a myth.
A myth? How so?
It masks the reality of corporate power and economic exploitation.
Okay, so it's not really a level playing field.
Not at all. He sees it as a system that's rigged.
Rigged in whose favor?
To benefit those who already have wealth and power.
Okay.
It's not this, level playing field where everyone has an equal chance.
Right.
He specifically criticizes neoliberal economic policies,
which
he argues have led to increased inequality.
Yeah, we see that.
Environmental degradation and the erosion of democratic institutions.
So the free market isn't really free.
Not in the way it's often presented.
Yeah.
Chomsky sees neoliberalism as a form of economic imperialism, where corporations and wealthy individuals have this outsized influence over governments.
So they can basically dictate the rules of the game.
Yeah, they're able to shape policies in ways that benefit themselves.
Right.
Often at the expense of the majority.
So these policies that are often presented as just neutral and objective,
Right, just the way things are.
the way the economy works,
Right.
are actually political choices
Exactly.
that have very real consequences for people.
And Chomsky's urging us to challenge those dominant economic narratives
Okay.
and demand policies that prioritize human needs over corporate profits.
So it's a call for a more just
Yeah.
and equitable economic system.
Exactly, one that benefits everyone,
Right.
not just those at the top.
Now let's talk about another key element of Chomsky's analysis.
Yeah.
His belief in the importance of international solidarity.
This is where his work starts to feel a bit more hopeful.
Right.
He's not just critiquing the system.
No.
He's actually offering a vision
He is.
for a better world.
He argues that building solidarity across borders,
Okay.
connecting with people
Yeah.
from different cultures and backgrounds, is essential for challenging those global systems of oppression.
So it's about recognizing our shared humanity
It is.
and working together
To create a world,
to create a better world.
yeah, based on cooperation
Right.
rather than competition and exploitation.
He specifically calls for solidarity with those who are struggling against U.S. imperialism.
He believes that supporting those struggles
Okay.
is a way to challenge U.S. power
Mm-hmm.
and create a more equitable global order.
So it's about building bridges
Yes, building bridges.
between people in the U.S.
Yeah.
and those in countries targeted by U.S. imperialism.
It's about seeing beyond national borders,
Yep.
recognizing that we're all part of a global community.
And that we have a responsibility to stand with those who are being marginalized and oppressed,
Absolutely.
no matter where they live.
Exactly. He sees international solidarity
Yeah.
as this powerful force for change,
Right.
one that can challenge the power of governments and corporations.
It's a reminder that we're not alone in this fight,
We're not alone.
that there are people all over the world
Yeah.
working for peace and justice.
Now, before we wrap up,
Okay.
I want to emphasize something that Chomsky returns to throughout his work.
Yeah.
He stresses that understanding the world
Okay.
isn't simply about accumulating knowledge.
It's about doing something with it.
It's about using that knowledge
Right.
to create change.
So it's not just about reading books
No.
and having these interesting conversations.
It's not enough to just be aware of the problems.
Right.
He's urging us to take action,
Okay.
to put our knowledge into practice.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Well, he believes that intellectual inquiry should be connected to action.
Okay.
That understanding how power works
Mm-hmm.
is meaningless unless we use that understanding to challenge injustice.
So be engaged.
Be engaged.
Use your voice.
You know,
use your skills.
Use your resources to make a difference.
He's challenging us to be more than just passive observers.
He is.
We all have a role to play
We do.
in creating a more just and equitable world.
So to bring it all back to this deep dive into At War with Asia,
Okay.
what are the key takeaways?
Yeah, what are we walking away with?
Well, Chomsky's work is this powerful indictment of U.S. foreign policy.
Okay.
He exposes the hidden motivations
Yeah.
behind military intervention
Right.
and the devastating consequences
Yeah.
for those on the receiving end of U.S. power.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
It can be hard to hear.
He makes us question the stories we've been told
Right.
about American exceptionalism,
Okay.
national interest,
Okay.
the spread of freedom and democracy.
For all these big ideas.
And while his analysis is often critical and unsettling, it's also grounded in a deep belief in the power of ordinary people
Yeah.
to create change.
It's not hopeless.
He doesn't just leave us with despair.
Right.
He offers a path forward.
So it's not just about being critical.
I
It's
know.
about being hopeful.
It's about believing that a better world is possible.
Oh, it's a good note to end on.
And Chomsky believes that a more just and peaceful world is possible.
Yeah.
But achieving it
Yeah.
requires us to be informed,
You're right. Yeah.
engaged,
Yeah.
and willing to challenge those in power.
It's a call to action.
It is.
A reminder that we all have a responsibility to shape the future.
As you reflect on everything we've discussed,
Yeah.
think about how much has really changed
Right.
in the decades since the Vietnam War.
Hmm.
Are the dynamics Chomsky describes still at play in U.S. foreign policy today?
That's a great question for our listeners to ponder.
It is.
It's up to each of us to examine the world around us, to question the narratives we're given, and to work towards a more just and peaceful world.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the work of Noam Chomsky.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.